is #1 desirable.
Today, I'm going to show you how I made an iron spider helmet with moving lenses. This iron spider helmet doesn't have any electronics inside it that are causing the eyes to move. Instead, the eyes are powered by a bike cable attached to a syringe. So when I press down on the syringe, it moves the lenses. Taking a closer look at the helmet, you might be surprised to find out that this wasn't 3D printed, but actually I made this myself using cardboard, fiberglass, epoxy, wood filler, plastic, and metal. As you may or may not know, 2 years ago I made this, a Miles Morales mask with moving lenses. But after 2 years, I've come a long way. And I'm happy to say that this Spider-Man mask is better than any other Spider-Man mask I've ever made. So this video is definitely one I wouldn't want you to miss. Yes, I know, you want to see what's inside and how it all moves, but before I show you that, I should take you back to where it all started. The first step was to create a paper template. I trimmed off any excess paper and then transferred this template onto a sheet of poster board. Doing this is basically like assembling pieces of a puzzle. By the way, I've included this template for free in the description. Don't thank me though, thank Dropout 3D, whose 3D model I used as a reference in order to create my paper pattern in Blender. So thank you to Dropout 3D for his brilliant 3D model. After cutting out all those pieces of poster board, I scored all the dashed lines with a knife, which just helps the cardboard be able to bend into the correct shape. Now we'll turn this weird looking two-dimensional shape into a nice three-dimensional helmet shape. I connected all the edges together using a bit of masking tape, and at this point I'm able to find out for the first time whether the helmet truly fits me or if I have to start all over again. Sometimes it takes a couple tries and I end up starting over, but this time I nailed it first try and luckily the helmet fit me like a glove. I super glued all the seams together and then got rid of the masking tape, and now we can move on to the next step. Of course, cardboard is a weak material. You can make a lot of shapes with cardboard, but it's not very strong. So to strengthen the cardboard, I'm going to use some tabletop epoxy resin and fiberglass cloth. This process of strengthening the cardboard is a bit like doing paper mache. All I'm doing is saturating the cloth in resin. I did a few layers of fiberglass on the inside of the helmet and then also coated the outside of the helmet in a generous coat of resin as well. And the result was a nice and firm helmet. After the resin cured, I quickly sanded the helmet with 60 grit sandpaper, and next I'll apply wood filler to the helmet. The goal with this is to smooth out the contour of the helmet so that the shape looks as perfectly round as possible. I gave the wood filler a moment to dry and then sanded with more 60 grit sandpaper until I was completely satisfied with the shape of the helmet. Moving on, I'm going to spray this 2K high build primer. If you don't know what this is, it's basically a very thick paint designed to fill in any unwanted texture on the surface. So this will make the roughness and grittiness of the wood filler disappear. After the primer cured, I sanded it with 220 grit sandpaper, and this is where we're at so far. I made a paper template for all the scales on the helmet. In total, there's 65 individual pieces, so I cut out all 65 pieces of paper, then positioned them on the helmet to the best of my ability. Now this template is not like gonna 100% accurately reflect what the helmet is supposed to look like. Rather, this template is just meant to give me like a good ballpark idea of where all the webbing lines are supposed to go, so that I can use all those pieces of paper as a rough guide while I draw those webbing lines on with a pencil. And now's a good time to cut the helmet in half, which is a necessary step if I want to be able to wear this helmet and be able to slide it over my head. It's important to cut along the webbing lines here so that the gap between the two pieces is less visible when the helmet is closed, because obviously no one wants a big ugly seam on the red part of the helmet. Here I pressed down hard with a pencil so that some of that graphite is able to transfer onto a piece of masking tape. Then I can easily cut this out, and now I have the exact shape of the scale which I can transfer onto a piece of warbler. If you've never heard of warbler, it's a type of plastic that can be easily sculpted when it's heated with a heat gun. So while the warbler is hot, I press it up against the helmet, and once it cools down, it will permanently stay curved like this. Then it's just a matter of tracing the masking tape shape onto the warbler, cutting it out, and then super gluing it onto the helmet. This process was a little tedious because I literally had to do it 65 times, but I'm not gonna lie, it was totally worth it because I think it came out stunning. The reason for that plastic wrap there is because I was sort of scared that the warbler would stick to the helmet, but actually I found out that the plastic wrap was totally useless. Because Warbler has a very grainy texture, I drenched on a whole lot more of that 2K high build primer to try and fill it in. The helmet was then sanded with 220 grit sandpaper, followed by another heavy coat of primer since one round of primer was not enough. This time I used 320 grit sandpaper, then I grinded the inside of the helmet with a rotary tool and sanding drum to get rid of any pointy bits that could cause discomfort. Now, painting this helmet that beautiful metallic red color is not really as simple as just slapping on some red paint on there and calling it a day, although I wish it was. There's a few steps we need to take if we want the red to look a certain way. The first step to achieving that red color is to start with a glossy black surface. So as you just saw a moment ago, I sprayed that black Dupli-Color primer, and now I'm spraying a 2K gloss clear coat, which is going to make the black super reflective and glossy. The reason we need a glossy black surface is because this Spaztics mirror chrome paint I'm airbrushing works best when it's sprayed over top of a glossy black surface. Likewise, the red paint I'm about to use works well over top of a chrome surface, so that's why we need to spray all these layers in that particular order. Before I spray the red paint though, I'm gonna mask off a few areas of the helmet using some liquid latex. Basically, the areas that are covered in liquid latex are gonna remain chrome, while the rest of the helmet gets sprayed with this Dupli-Color metal cast red. And what that will do is result in sort of like a paint chipping effect, where it gives the illusion that some red paint has flaked off and exposed some bare metal underneath. I did my best to carefully apply very, very thin coats of that red paint because that particular red paint is really thin and it drips and runs really easily. After giving the red paint sufficient time to dry, I wiped away the liquid latex to reveal the chrome underneath, and I loved the result. I think it makes a huge difference in convincing your eyes that this is real metal when of course it's not. Following this, I mixed together some black acrylic paint with a tiny bit of white acrylic paint to get a really dark shade of gray, and then painted in between all the scales. Hey, I'm gonna be honest, crafting isn't always as easy and effortless as I make it seem in some of my YouTube videos. Remember, this video was carefully edited to show you the most glamorous parts of the building process. But in reality, crafting can be filled with challenges, mistakes, and frustration. That's why I try to prioritize my mental well-being. A great way to prioritize mental well-being is BetterHelp. Thank you, BetterHelp, for sponsoring this video. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, and it's 100% online. BetterHelp has over 30,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. Honestly, they make this process so simple and efficient. To get started, all you do is answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy, and from there, BetterHelp will match you with the right therapist from their network. Then you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether that's via text, chat, phone, or video call. You can message your therapist anytime and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. If, for whatever reason, you feel that your therapist is not the right fit, you can always switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom picked for you, more scheduling flexibility, and at a more affordable price. So it's kind of like a no-brainer. If you want 10% off your first month, just go to betterhelp.com/Sean'sCrafts. That's betterhelp.com/Sean'sCrafts. And I've also linked them in the description. So where were we? Oh yeah, after I painted all the webbing lines, I went over the entire helmet one more time with that same 2K gloss clear coat I used earlier, and it turned out terrific. For the lenses, I went ahead and just free-handed the shape as best as I could. And don't forget, I've made this template available for free in the description. On that note, let me just say that for those of you who want to make this, it's important to consider that everyone who's in this hobby may have varying budgets in terms of what supplies they're able to get. Different skill levels, a diverse range of knowledge. Some people have more time to spend, some people have less time to spend. Some people prefer using a 3D printer for its efficiency, whereas some people like a more hands-on approach. Ultimately, everyone may be in a different situation, which is perfectly okay. That's why I encourage you to experiment and don't be afraid to mix my ideas with your own ideas. The template is like a starting point, and there's endless possibilities with what you can do with the template. So if you're a hobbyist like me, I hope you're feeling a little more inspired today. And for everyone else who's watching purely for entertainment, thanks for listening to my tangent. I appreciate you. Alright, as you can see, I coated the lenses in resin, sanded with 320 grit, and then sprayed that high build primer. Of course, these lenses need to be painted black, and then I protected the paint with a 2K satin clear coat. This is basically the same clear coat I used earlier, except this one has a satin finish instead of a gloss finish. We'll come back to those lenses later, but for now, it's time to reveal how the shutters are able to move. I heated and shaped this piece of Warbler so that it matches the curve of the helmet. Then I painted it the same way I painted the lenses, Dupli-Color black, followed by a satin clear coat. Once it was safe to touch, I temporarily taped this piece into the eye socket like this. The shutter pieces that move are made of this aluminum sheet metal. These pieces are also included in the template in case you want to give this a try. I sanded the metal with 400 grit sandpaper to prepare the surface for paint, and then painted the metal exactly how I painted the previous piece. There's one more shutter piece I need to cut out, but instead of metal, I'm going to use this black plastic lid from a container because this piece needs to be flexible. I cut out this tiny little piece shaped like the letter R, and then connected that to this metal shutter piece right here. Using some 3-pound fishing line, I tied a knot to secure this joint. Then I fed that string through the hole, tied another knot, super glued the string to keep it from unraveling, and then trimmed off any excess fishing line. With a sewing pin, I poked a small hole in the plastic right there, threaded more fishing line through that hole, tied a knot, and super glued it shut. We'll come back to this in just a second, right after I cut this pin with a wire cutter so that I'm just left with this tiny portion of the pin right here. Now I can insert this little pin through that hole in the metal. And see that little hole in the warbler right there? That's where this shutter piece is going to pivot from. I also inserted a pin right there, which we'll need for later. Using more of those pins, I connected this bottom shutter to that hole in the top right corner, and connected the top shutter to that hole in the top left corner. And now, the moment you've been waiting for, and some of you even skipped for. Now, it's important for the tension to be just right in order for the shutters to have full range of motion, and that could take a couple tries. That's why I glued the fishing line to the poster board, because that way I wouldn't have damaged the paint if I had to lift up the fishing line and reposition it had I failed to get the tension right. A little bit of baking soda makes the super glue dry almost instantly, and I can trim off any excess string I don't need. With a pair of pliers, I bent this pin at a 90-degree angle, and this pin will be very important later on. There you have it, moving lenses. Although this doesn't articulate quite as far as the Miles Morales mask, it's like so much more low profile, which I really prefer. One of the problems with the previous design is it just took up so much room, so comparatively it looks kind of conspicuous. So I think this new design is an improvement. But I can't take all the credit. I gotta thank my good friend Greg from Propway, because as you can see, my moving lens is quite derivative from his moving lens. It's only after seeing his moving lens that I was like, oh wait, that's a good concept, and had the idea to make this. So thank you, Propway. Now, one flaw I noticed with this is that the fishing line tends to pop out of place once a little bit of slack is introduced in the fishing line. One way to resolve this though is to remove the pin, cut out and attach this tiny piece of plastic to the pin, reinsert the pin, and now that piece of plastic blocks the fishing line from popping out. Right now there's nothing keeping those pins from falling out, so I'm gonna mix up a little bit of JB Weld and apply that to the back of the pins, and that should keep them locked in there for good. I let that JB Weld sit so it could cure, and afterwards I glued this whole thing inside the helmet using super glue and baking soda. To make the other eye, I just had to mirror the pieces of the template, and that worked surprisingly well. Like I mentioned a moment ago, the fishing line tends to pop out of place once a little bit of slack is introduced in there. So I added a little bit of JB Weld epoxy putty to these guys here, and now I don't have to worry about that fishing line popping out. Obviously, we're not quite done yet, as we still need to figure out a way to control the movement of the shutters. All I've told you so far is that the eyes are controlled by a bike cable attached to this syringe. But of course, there's a little more to it than that. Inside the syringe are these 4 springs, which automatically open the shutters when you release the plunger. This is a bike derailleur cable, and it's basically like a wire inside a tube that's designed to slide freely with very little friction. I used my wire cutter to cut off one of the heads so that I could separate the wire from the tube. From there, I marked and cut about a foot off of the tube since it was a little too long for my height. Now I can insert that wire through the plunger, through the syringe, through the tube, and push that wire all the way in until it can't go any further, at which point I'll add a bit of JB Weld epoxy putty to keep the wire stuck to the plunger. That way when I press on the syringe, the plunger and the wire move together at the same time. Since I've never used JB Weld epoxy putty before, I made sure to test it out before I used it on the bike cable wire, and I was incredibly shocked at how well it bonded to metal. I can't believe I didn't discover this product sooner. I secured the cable to the syringe with some hockey tape, and of course there's 2 syringes, one for the left eye and one for the right eye. I glued the cables inside the helmet using this flexible heavy-duty glue called E6000. This particular glue takes forever to dry though, so it helps to hold down the cables with a bit of super glue first. Moment of truth, I connected the wire to the pin using more JB Weld epoxy putty, and it works. Of course, I don't want this wire to poke me, so I can cover that up with some hockey tape, and that should do the trick. The white part of the eye was made using the head of a Milkus bottle. I just sandwiched a piece of white sports mesh in between these two pieces of plastic and hot glued that inside the helmet. Afterwards, I took a minute to admire the moving shutter mechanism one more time before I have to permanently cover it up with those lenses I made earlier. Before gluing on the lenses, I just scratched off the finish a little to try and make sure the super glue adheres a little better. Just like in the movies, I wanted these eyes to light up blue, and there's definitely a better way to do this, but I just kept things simple and ordered these ice blue LEDs on AliExpress, got rid of those plastic thingies, and then glued it in the helmet and called it a day. As you can see, these LEDs are powered by a little teeny weeny coin battery, which is perfect because there's literally no room inside this helmet for anything else. I connected the two halves of the helmet together by hot gluing some fabric elastic inside there, and finally we add some 8x5mm neodymium magnets in there, and we're done. Mr. Stark, it smells like a new car in here. Hi, Spider-Man. Band practice, was it? Wait, you're not Mr. Stark. Who are you?
Who? Me?
What? Yeah, I know, I could have 3D printed this, but if you know me, you know I enjoy handcrafting things with love and attention to detail. It's almost like a home cook who spends hours cooking a delicious home-cooked meal instead of going out to eat. As corny as it sounds, for me the fun and excitement is in the journey, not just the end result. If you're going to print the template, you'll need Adobe Acrobat Reader. It's free and only takes like 2 minutes to get it. After you've downloaded the template, you'll notice that there's 4 files here. Just right-click right here, then open with Adobe Acrobat Reader. Then click the printer icon, select the poster format, and set the overlap to 0. Right here where it says tile scale, you should take the circumference of your head, divide that by 570, and multiply that by 100. And whatever number you get is what you're going to input as the tile scale. If you do that, I'm pretty sure the helmet will fit you properly first try. Once you've done that, just specify what type of paper you're using, and then you can hit print. Make sure you follow those exact same steps for both head and scales, so these two right here. But as for moving shutters and lens, so these two here, the only difference when printing these is you should click size instead of poster, then click custom scale and type the same number as before. Basically, the only time you need to click poster is when the template is too big to fit on one sheet of paper, but other than that, it's unnecessary. If you liked this video, then you'll probably like my previous video as well, which was a cardboard stormbreaker, so click the screen right here if you want to watch that video. Thank you very, very much to my patrons for supporting me on Patreon, and thank you for watching.